Good morning, Bucketville. Today we have a very special podcast sponsored by Galaxy, the official box fan of the Get Buckets podcast.
Yes, Bucketsville. Today is a very special podcast as we have ESPN and ESPN.com's Rick Bucher is going to Skype with us and talk about the NBA playoffs, and so that'll happen later, whenever, I guess whenever we try that. But really goes to say that social media is just really awesome. Wouldn't you say that?
It's a little bit above average, yeah.
Speaking of social media, you should like the podcast on Facebook and tell all your friends to do so as well. We actually picked up a new follower this week. One of you that are hiding in the woodwork, Sean Hill, you know who you are. So there's more of you. I mean, there's more people that listen to this and don't like it. And for those of you that do that, we're ashamed.
And one more thing, if you get the chance, either tweet at Nathan or go to his Facebook wall and tell him that he's an idiot and he doesn't know what he's talking about.
I don't know how that fits into the intro.
You're right. I'm sorry. Let's move on.
That's definitely not written in the intro. Does it say, hey, let's bash
Sorry,
Nathan?
I don't write the podcast outline, but in my version of it, it actually says, let's bash Nathan.
Oh, does it?
Uh-huh.
Does it say that periodically, or is it just in this spot?
It says it every once in a while.
Great. I'm really looking forward to that. More social media. Follow us on Twitter if you haven't yet. If you even have a Twitter, you should have a Twitter by now. You should probably just create an account just to follow the Get Buckets podcast.
I could not agree more. I tweet some very good things from there, and I make up for the lack of knowledge in Nathan's tweets.
Yeah, good stuff. So here's what we're going to do. We'll run down, I guess, kind of all the series, and then afterwards we will have Rick join us. So let's start at the top with the Eastern Conference and the Heat and Celtics series. The Heat go up 3-1 with their big overtime win last night. What did you think about that win last night?
It was a gutsy win. It was kind of an expected win in my eyes, with Rondo not at full health. And the way KG played really just killed the Celtics. He did not shoot well from the field. It was the Heat's game to take, and the Celtics didn't play great. With Rondo hurt, KG played terrible. They just don't have enough other guys to kind of pick up that slack.
Yeah, I thought they answered that question, which I think you posed a few weeks ago or last week, that who was going to take that clutch shot and who was going to make one. And down 3 with the Garden going nuts, LeBron hit just a dumb corner 3 in front of the Celtics bench. And that's got to be, I think, who was it? Brian Windhurst said it. That's as clutch as a shot as he's probably ever seen him make, considering all the circumstances, and tied the game. And I would definitely agree with you that KG goes from having a career game in Game 3 to a 1-for-10 effort in Game 4, and you're not going to beat the Heat if Rondo's out and you have to have other people step up and KG doesn't do it.
Yeah, and I don't think the Celtics are quite out of this series yet, though. If they come to play, I think they can play with and beat the Heat, but I don't know if they're going to be able to bring it, especially with Rondo's just not going to be at full health the rest of the series, and if they advance the rest of the playoffs, it's just not possible. And I think the rest of the guys just might be a little too old.
Yeah, let's talk about Rondo. I said I wanted to talk about it, but I really don't have a lot of words. That's as gutsy of a performance coming back in Game 3 and then playing Game 4 without getting any kind of shot for the pain. That's a painful injury in the dislocation of an elbow. I can't imagine playing through something like that.
Yeah, I was really, really impressed with it, and you could see that it hindered him a little bit. But I mean, he made some gutsy plays. A little left-handed, almost shuttle pass early on, tipping that ball that kind of got passed down court with his left hand, and ABC might have overblown it a little bit, but it was still gutsy, just the fact that he was trying it.
Yeah, and he's out there, and he's probably the only player in the league that could do this because of his game. His game doesn't require a ton of offensive ability, so he's out there playing with one arm and is generally effective. And more so in the first half. He played really well, I thought, considering all the circumstances in the first half. And the second half, he didn't really do a lot. Found himself on the bench in crunch time, and I don't blame Doc Rivers at all. He just doesn't have it with that injury, and Delonte provided much more of a threat, especially offensively, late in the fourth quarter.
I'll say that I think in that game, the Celtics missed Nate Robinson more than they have since that trade. He would have been, in my eyes, a better version of Delonte West because he's better at creating his own shot from anywhere on the court.
Game 5 of the series is tonight. We have the Bulls and Hawks, and this series is tied, and I don't think a lot of people had that, but the Hawks are winning games, and it may be more the Bulls losing them. I really don't know, but I do know one thing. Derrick Rose can't take 32, 33 shots and then win a game. They're starting to look a lot like the Cleveland Cavaliers of the last few years.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't want to put all the blame on Derrick Rose. Maybe like I might have put all the blame on LeBron James in the past, but maybe that wasn't fair of me. I think Thibodeau has to encourage his guys to run through their stuff, not just have Rose bring it up court and isolate a guy and either drive or kick. I think they need to run the offense that got them where they are because they got to first place in the East by easily beating teams like the Pacers, the Hawks. These teams aren't great teams, and now they're struggling with them once the playoffs come around.
Why do you think that is? You think it's because they're not running the offense? I mean, do you think that Derrick Rose is too ball dominant during this series, or are the Hawks just playing well, or any combination of the two?
I think it's a combination of the two. But I think part of it is Derrick Rose isn't just being ball dominant. It's they're not getting into their sets. And that is as much the coaching staff's fault as it is Derrick Rose's fault. And when they get into their sets, you can run through your set. And if the option's not there, then you get the ball back to Rose and let him do what he's been doing all the time in isolating somebody. But you've got to run through your sets. You've got to get a guy like Bucher in rhythm and see if you can get him going because he's going to be the key to winning this series in my mind.
He's played awful the first 4 games of this series. And I think I read something that it came out that he has a toe injury. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Okay. I mean, still, I'll give credit to the Hawks, too, because I don't think anyone thought this was going to be a 7-game series, and it still might not. The Bulls could take it in, 6?
Yeah.
But I think that they're playing well enough and they're defending home court well enough that it could be a 7-game series. And people like Josh Smith, who have these good games and bad games, if they continue having good games, he's as dynamic as anyone in the league, and he can change a series just like that. And so I don't think the Hawks will win this series, but I think they're making it very interesting for him.
Last game is exactly what the Bulls probably dreaded happening, and the fact that Josh Smith might have realized that he is much more effective attacking the basket and getting shots around the basket instead of settling for jump shots, specifically 3-point jump shots. And if Josh Smith comes out and attacks the basket, I really do think the Hawks have a good chance to win this series. Also, Jeff Teague has done a marvelous job stepping in for Heinrich, who's been injured. And it almost might be a blessing that Teague is getting all these starts and all these minutes because I feel like he's doing a better job defensively. I think he's more athletic than Heinrich, and that's really helping him against guarding Derrick Rose and forcing him into taking tough jump shots and tough three-pointers. And I think Jeff Teague has been very key for the Hawks in this series.
I would definitely agree with that. It's kind of like you said, a blessing that someone that's not really athletic and Kirk Heinrich, who was playing well, but he gets hurt, and then Jeff T comes kind of from nowhere and steps up and plays solid defense, doing what he needs to on offense. It's really just the perfect formula if you're a Hawks fan, which I don't think there's a lot of those out there.
And I've got one more thing. Nathan, you're an idiot.
Wow. Awesome. That is... you said you had it sprinkled in there, but I didn't know it was going to be so quick. I was not ready for that.
Well, be prepared.
Moving to the Western Conference, last night was probably the greatest game of the playoffs, maybe even all season. Triple overtime. Thunders beat the Grizzlies after, you thought the Thunder had it. Then they lost the 7-point overtime lead. You thought the Grizzlies had it in, I think, double overtime. The Thunder come back. This game went back and forth, and it was really who survived. I don't think anybody really won, but the Thunder survived, and they tied the series up 2-2 going back to OKC.
Yeah, that game, it was the most exciting game of the playoffs so far, and it kind of was everything that is good with playoff basketball, with the exception of maybe a technical that shouldn't have been given. I follow John Hollinger on Twitter, and he kind of gives the play-by-play if he's at the game of what actually happened during the technical. And Russell Westbrook's first technical, Russell Westbrook said, and I quote, "That's not a foul." And maybe his body language showed a little bit, but telling a ref that that's not a foul happens up and down the court time and time again, and people don't get technicals for it. So I feel like that was a quick whistle on Russ, but it was really, that game embodied everything playoff basketball is about.
Yeah, and there was a few more too. Pert got a quick one, and then Collison got just a dumb one at the end. And there was a brief second in my mind where I thought, what are these refs doing? It quickly went away, but I was kind of wondering if they were really trying to force this Grizzlies win, because some of these whistles were just way too fast for a playoff game, nonetheless.
And Kevin Durant, in my mind, he came up really big. If you remember him hitting, I don't remember, I guess it was maybe the first overtime where he hit a big three. He just caught it and popped it right away.
Yeah, that was when that pushed that lead to 7.
He has been frustrated all series. He gets pushed around, and he's pushed back in all the wrong ways. But when he does push back, he gets called for it. And Shane Battier is allowed to body him however he wants. And Durant he responded fairly well last night. He's a great teammate regardless of how he's playing, and that's one of my favorite things to watch about him. He's always encouraging somebody, holding somebody back, keeping somebody from doing something stupid, telling somebody to get to the basket, and it's fun to watch the Thunder.
Something that may be concerning, maybe not, we can talk about this, is Russell Westbrook took 33 shots last night. He did finish with 40 points, only had 3 turnovers. By all means, I thought he played his best game of the series. I thought he was awesome. But he took 13 more shots than the NBA's leading scorer. And I guess I'll ask you, is this because of the defense that was being played on Durant, or is Westbrook looking for his own shot too much?
In the game last night, it had nothing to do with Russell Westbrook looking for his own shot too much. I think it has to do with a combination of the defense and Thunder coach Scott Brooks doing a terrible, terrible job of designing plays to get Durant open. You saw in the third overtime, KD got the ball and walked it up court, broke down Shane Battier, and hit a shot to clinch the game. And it was just absolutely filthy. And you have to wonder, why not just let Durant bring the ball up when there's 18 seconds left and you know you're holding for the last shot? Why not get the best scorer in the game the isolation attempt instead of letting him get bodied running off of a screen and not being in position to catch a basketball? I also thought Scott Brooks did a very poor job. I think the Thunder had a chance to win the game at the end of regulation, overtime, and double overtime, and he just never drew up a play that was worth anything. it was always the second option that worked, and the second option was always Russ, and that's not his fault.
Yeah, they maybe almost need to go to kind of the Jimmer Fredette philosophy of let him bring it up. Like, first guy that gets the rebound, Durant go get it. Because once he gets into the half court, they're just all over him. And he's also, I'm going to put him a lot at fault here. He's not really working hard to get the ball. He's kind of just standing there with his feet on the three-point line and kind of just watching Russell Westbrook do a lot of this stuff. He's not working really hard to get the ball. He's trying to maybe shield his man for a lob, but he's got to work harder to get open with teams that D him up like the Grizzlies are doing.
Right, and I agree with that. And I think some of that just is frustration on the way that Shane Battier has been able to push him around. And I think some of it's frustration of why do we keep running him off of screens where they can body him instead of just letting him walk the ball up court if we're going to go isolation. But you're right. There were 3 or 4 straight possessions last night where he just stood there right outside the three-point line, not even looking to fight for the ball, not even looking to get in position to get a pass. So you're right. Part of the blame should definitely go to Durant on that.
And we may be being a little too harsh. I mean, he still finished with 35, and Westbrook did have 40, but that's not going to happen every night. And I think this is more like a long-term fix that we're trying to propose, that he has to work harder. Coach Brooks has to draw up something for him to get him the ball that gets him moving, and maybe even Westbrook needs to look for him a little bit more. I think it's a combination of those 3 going forward could be great for the Thunder. And how do you see this series finishing?
As much momentum as Memphis had early in Game 4, it looked awful for Oklahoma City. But the truth is they came back, they did what they needed to do in Memphis, and they have home court advantage back. I've got the Thunder in 7.
So you think that Memphis will win Game 6?
I do. I think Memphis will win Game 6, and Oklahoma City will finish them out in 7.
Not that you care what I think, but I'll take them in 6. I think this may have been the loss that just takes it out of the Grizzlies, and I'm probably wrong, but hey, I'll say it in 6.
I really, really hope you're right. That would be great. I mean, we're a pro Thunder podcast here.
Yeah, we are pro Thunder.
And the last thing I see on our outline for this series right here, it says Bash Nathan. So I just like to take a brief second to let you know that you're an imbecile.
Thank you. First off, my outline doesn't have that on it. My outline actually has the Lakers and Mavs as the next series. We're going to talk a lot about that with Rick Bucher, but something that I know Hank wants us to talk about is the Andrew Bynum foul on J.J. Barea and just kind of how that game unfolded late for the Lakers. First off, I'll let you talk about it, and then I'll chime in whenever I feel necessary.
Okay. The Lamar Odom getting kicked out for the push on Dirk Nowitzki, it was a foul. It was probably a technical foul. But I think the kicking him out for what he did was a little extreme. He pushed him, his arms extended, sure, but I don't know that deserved him being ejected from the game. However, Andrew Bynum made a completely boneheaded play. If you're going to foul someone hard, at least make it look decent. And Andrew Bynum barely elevated, took his forearm right into J.J. Barea, who I hate, took it right into his ribs, and never even looked at the ball, much less made a play on the ball.
Yeah, I don't agree with anything that Andrew Bynum did. It was egregious. It was terrible. He should have been ejected. It was, and I totally understand. From the basketball standpoint, you're getting killed by 30. This kid's tearing you up. I have no problem with you wanting to put him on the ground, but there's going to be some kind of punishment that's greater than a fine. And I've seen things and heard things that are just stupid that I feel, and this is where I'm going to start defending Bynum. I've seen 10-game suspension, suspending 15 games next season. Like, for what? What is so wrong that he deserves 15 games, 10 or 15 games? That's a maximum, in my mind, that's a maximum 3-game suspension. I just don't. And the only valid argument you have for anything above 5 games is that he's already been previously suspended for something very similar that he did to Michael Beasley earlier this year.
I see it, and I say, let's rewind to the NBA 20 years.
Oh, yes, please.
20 years ago, Andrew Bynum does that in a playoff game, and he is at most looking at a technical foul.
Yeah, $5,000 fine for that big fight with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale. They got a $5,000 fine, which, I mean, we can extrapolate that, and so we can say that it would be like 100,000 or something like that, but it was no more than a fine. No one got suspended.
So, I mean, if we turn this back 20 years, the NBA was a different place, and you're looking at a technical foul. And I think, in my mind, he got kicked out of the game, and he probably deserved to get kicked out of the game.
Yeah.
It was a 30-point game. There was no reason for what he did. There was really no reason for him to even be on the court, but that's beside the point. I mean, I would have had Luke Walton in at center by then. But and you look at it more in depth, I just think he needs to spend some more time with Ron Artest, who went from the fight in Detroit when he was a Pacer to the NBA Citizen of the Year this year. So maybe he just needs to spend time with Ron Artest or Ron Artest's psychiatrist, and we'll call it even. But I don't even think a suspension is needed.
Yeah, I'd love to agree with the no suspension thing, and I think that going back 20 years that this is just normal. And I think that people are so conditioned now because basketball is kind of, if we look at TV ratings, it's actually becoming a popular sport to watch, and we're seeing dramatic increases in TV ratings and popularity, and people are playing this sport, they're liking it, they're watching it, they're intrigued, and with that kind of spotlight, they're taking this way too far. Like, they should have a course for every wannabe basketball fan that you have to watch all these old games and how physical they are, because this new look safe NBA where we're throwing people out for hard fouls, and I have no problem with throwing him out. It was a 30-point game. But possibly suspending him for that for next year, not even a game this year because there's no more. For the start of next year to carry that over, it baffles me. I cannot understand that.
And I'm gonna go on one more very quick tangent before we bring Rick on. Nothing that we want to change is going to change until David Stern is no longer the commissioner. David Stern has done some very good things for the NBA, but he has made the NBA soft. He's allowed it to become soft, and David Stern is almost like a dictator. I mean, you see Stan Van Gundy say one thing that he thinks David Stern's doing wrong, and he gets slapped with a $50,000 fine. David Stern is killing the freedom of speech in the NBA, and I understand that if a coach or a player takes it too far, yes, there needs to be action. But just because ex-coach disagrees with a call that was made in the game and he says it publicly, doesn't mean that there should be a $50,000 fine. And David Stern is trying to silence everyone that disagrees with him and silence everyone that doesn't agree with every little decision that the NBA makes.
Okay, we are now joined by ESPN and ESPN.com's Rick Bucher. And Rick, with the Lakers now swept from the playoffs, how plausible would you that in the next few weeks that we're sitting here and we're saying the Dallas Mavericks are world champions?
It's as plausible as anybody else.
What's impressed you the most about them?
What has impressed me the most? You know what? Nothing. I mean, there's no one standout thing. I look at it, and obviously Dirk has been solid. Here's my problem with where we're going with the Dallas Mavericks as a result of sweeping the Lakers. I just feel as if this had so much more to do with the Lakers than it did the Dallas Mavericks. I'll tell you the thing that impressed me most, and it's not just with this series, it's overall, is that everyone has doubted the Mavericks. They were the favorite to get knocked out by the Blazers in the first round. And what I appreciate and admire about the Mavericks is up until last night when Jason Terry said no one's really expected anything of us, and even then he wasn't volatile about it. They have every right to kind of go, hey, you know what? Everybody's been counting us out. We've gotten no respect. We've deserved far more respect. Look where we are. And they haven't gone there. They've just gone about their business.
Rick, you've said publicly that the Lakers need to make some changes. You've talked about blowing them up a little bit, but the Lakers aren't your average team. They're the LA Lakers. They've got the big lights. They've got the superstars. Can you define blowing the Lakers up for us?
There are certainly two ways to go. Obviously, we're going to get a total change at the top. Phil Jackson going out also sort of changes the dynamic of who's running that team. And then below that, it really depends on – look, they're not going to trade Kobe. And our guys have already said, okay, everybody's available except Kobe. But it's an interesting – and he has a no-trade clause. It's an interesting dilemma because do you, at this point, do you want to build around Kobe Bryant? And what's it going to cost you if you do that? Now, short of that, there's two other guys, Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum, clearly not on the same, clearly disconnected with Kobe at this point. So I would start there as far as who you're going to move. Do you move both? Probably not. I would say above and beyond, Pau Gasol is probably the first guy that goes because he still has value and because that disconnect was so obvious.
Okay, Rick, if I may, that sounds like an overreaction to a team that was going for a three-peat this year. They've been to the finals the last 3 years. I don't see the need for them to blow it up. Just this whole notion about building around Kobe, they obviously have to do this. I mean, they're paying him $25 million a year for the rest of his career. And Bynum, you're only going to trade him if you get size back in return. Because, size is still an advantage in the NBA, am I right?
Well, I will say this: size is not where the game is. Where the game is now, I will say that. Second, I'm talking about pieces. Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum are your most tradable pieces, and you need to get more athletic and younger on the perimeter. What was shown is you can be long, and you can have the best size in the league. And it will still leave you vulnerable, and more vulnerable today because if you look around the league, everybody has a great pick-and-roll point guard. And that's more than anything is what took down the Lakers.
Rick, you probably know the ins and outs of Kobe a little more than me and Nathan do. Do you think that he was stunned at all by the way that his team went out?
No, I honestly believe he saw it coming. Kobe's always throwing up smoke screens. And when he did that thing after Game 3 about, I may be crazy, I may be nuts, but to me, that was a show. And one of the crux of this is that the team at this point knows that Kobe, think about this and think where we were last year. There were still times where Kobe Bryant, with everything else falling down, Kobe Bryant would just get mad and go out and take over a game. Or at least take it far enough so that the rest of the guys could join in and then you could finish people off. Kobe's not there anymore. And so when Kobe does hey, I may be crazy, I may be nuts, we can still get this done, it doesn't carry the same punch because those guys in the locker room know, you know what, he's not that guy anymore.
Now with Kobe, he has that whole it's always everyone else's fault deal. And that's part of why people like him because they see that competitive edge and that spark. And I would say it also makes people hate him. And then we're just talking stupid stuff like what he did 2 nights ago with throwing behind the back passes into the fourth row. And then he has the audacity to look at our test and is like, dude, man, thought you were going to make that cut. And then gives you that nice Kobe death glare. And I just think sometimes he can be just a real tough guy to play with on the court and maybe tougher than anyone in the league. What do you think about that?
That is going to be the most difficult aspect of continuing to build around him, because you're going to have to put better players around him, and you're going to have to put scorers around him. And will he be willing to make the transition that we've seen, say, with a Jason Kidd, who essentially has become Derek Fisher? He's point guard in name only. He's a spot-up shooter now. And he has willingly said, okay, you know what, J.J. Barea, when we're on the floor, J.J. Barea's handling the ball. You're trying to bring Roddy Beaubois along. I mean, again, it's easy to say, but for guys who are so used to having the ball in their hand and being central to their game, to their team, Jason has made that transition. I see Kobe having a much harder time of it. We saw it this year. He couldn't get to the cup anymore, so he just started taking deeper and deeper threes. He hit just enough of them for us to be still intimidated by that. But by and large, that was not doing a whole lot for the Lakers.
Okay, moving to Phil Jackson. Do you think that there's one last run for Phil in his coaching career?
I do, and I've heard New York. I'm not convinced that New York can get there on short enough. The runway's too short for them to become a title contender, because I do believe that it's a year off, and then there's somebody who's primed. Even the Lakers. I mean, look, if the Lakers reload and they go through a lockout-shortened season and fall on their faces, but they've got Dwight Howard or Chris Paul, or they got one more run in them, who else do you go out there and get that can immediately make all that come together? And I honestly believe that would intrigue him. I do believe he will come back, because as much as he paints himself as a Renaissance man and having all these other interests, look, basketball is just so integral to everything he's done, and I don't know where you get the same sort of jolt or juice.
I mean, can the man coach into his 70s? He's 65 right now.
Yeah. Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, I think he could. He could get in and out again. Look, he only did a 2-year deal the first time he came back.
But for what purpose? I mean, why come back?
Because he's the closer and because he can. Because just to come back and rebuild a team, I mean, that's not his thing. But when you can play for all the marbles, coaching a team and coaching the absolute best, I believe that's a catnip that we can only imagine, but has guys constantly coming back to get a taste of.
What do you think the most realistic move is for LA to make this offseason to better prepare them for another run next season?
I don't know who they can get. I mean, the question with Dwight Howard is Dwight Howard has to say, I want to go. Look, Carmelo wanted to go to New York, and nobody else really got in the run. New Jersey got close, but that's where he was going to go, and ultimately he got to go where he wanted to go. Players, by and large, whether they have a no-trade clause or whatever, they control their destiny. I would expect the same, but he's going to have to say, look, I want to go to L.A., so you're going to have to make the best deal that you can make with the Lakers. And outside of that, Chris Paul is certainly out there, but then we get into what kind of team are you building? And that's a case where you're going to have to give up length. If you give up an Andrew Bynum for a Chris Paul, have you really improved yourself? I feel a lot better if it's Pau Gasol for Chris Paul, because then you still have that size and you still have that youth. But where Chris Paul's knees are, if it's Andrew Bynum in the equation, he'll make you a little bit better, but does he make you enough where you go, we are decidedly a different team?
Rick, we may be looking at the end of an era here, or kind of like a mini era, with the Lakers going down in 4 to the Mavs. Obviously have a lot of changes that we just talked about. And then the Celtics, who are now on the brink of elimination with the Heat. And it's certainly an interesting time in the NBA.
It is, and we're seeing a sea change in the way the game is played. The athleticism. I mean, if you look at the way Oklahoma City won that game last night, if you see the way Miami outlasted Boston, it's not – it used to be the experience and the execution, and you found that little flaw, and you picked at it, and then things opened up. And now we're just bringing our freight train. We're going to see if our freight train is faster and stronger than your freight train. And that's how those games were decided last night. And when I look around the league, what we're seeing athletically across the board, we're at a whole new level. If you're not a super athlete and you don't have super athletes on your team, this old school idea of we're going to out X and O you, that doesn't exist.
I know we've talked quite a bit about the Lakers here, but how do you see the younger teams like Memphis and Oklahoma City? How do you see them being prepared for the next few years? How set are they in their talent level?
The trickiest part, and this is why the collective bargaining agreement is going to be so fascinating in terms of what we have on the other side, is you have to pay for these, and you have to pay for them in small markets. And are you going to have a hard cap, which is going to restrict you? I mean, right now, Memphis, Michael Heisley has decided, I like this team, I'm going to pay for this team, but the numbers that he's throwing out there for a small market team are just not realistic from a financial standpoint as it stands now. It's almost like one of those where you pay for it, you take a shot at it, you don't get it, okay, we got to tear it down because it's just too expensive. We see it in baseball all the time.
Now that the Heat have a 3-1 lead in their series, there's a lot of people out there in the media, in your business, that are starting to talk about labeling them as favorites for the championship, and they think they can make a serious run at a title this season. Is that fair?
I believe that's absolutely fair. I thought this was where the train would stop, and when they won those first 2 games in Miami, I felt like Boston had to punch a hole in their balloon. And when they didn't, that was where I said, you know what? I never saw Miami winning a championship this first year, but I can see the path there now.
Rick, we have just a couple more questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here. We need to be wrapping up soon.
Hold on. Rick is actually not here. We lost the call.
Okay, well, we'll try to get Rick back on the line before we end, but it's been a pretty long podcast, so we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah, you gotta go too. But, I mean, we really only had 2 more questions, which weren't even that good. So we're probably going to call that, I guess, the end of the podcast today. So first off, we'd love to thank Rick Bucher for joining us. Really goes to show if you harass someone on Twitter what it can do for you. So we really want to thank him for joining us today. And you got anything to say to Bucketsville before you go to your softball game?
I would like to thank Rick. It was a privilege to have him on here and to talk to someone as knowledgeable as he is. I guess the last thing I have to say is, when you listen to this, if everyone would just take a moment of silence for the fact that Luke Walton is no longer in the playoffs, that would be perfect.
And we will take ours now.
Get buckets, Bucketville. Get buckets.